slide, just a quick introduction. My name is Stephanie Hill, and go back one. There we go. Just a little background on myself. I have over 10 years of experience in clinical research and research management. I received my bachelor's from the University of Colorado and my master's from Boston University School of Medicine. I began my research career at Boston Medical with my focus on hepatology and gastroenterology. I returned to the University of Colorado in February 2014 as the clinical trials and regulatory manager for the hepatology and gastroenterology group. I joined the Oncology Research Support Team, or OCRST, as a monitor in July of 2017, and I became the monitor manager for OCRST in 2021. Next slide. Our monitoring team is a part of the OCRST group, who is a part of the Cancer Center. The resources and services provided by OCRST are aimed at supporting clinical research across the CU Cancer Center research enterprise. The OCRST team helps with everything from IITs, which the monitoring team is a part of, education, which these lunch and learns are a part of, NCTN, Orion, as well as data and quality reporting. Next slide. Our monitoring team is currently a team of 6 and are kept very busy with the Cancer Center IITs. We have a vast range of experience on our team that really helps in monitoring the IITs. Next slide. Currently, we're providing monitoring services for 42 studies with 67 sites. So far this year, we've completed 140 monitoring visits. That's as of October 23rd. Since then, we've done quite a few more. We're busy. Next slide. As we know, the University of Colorado Cancer Center is committed to promoting and supporting investigator-initiated trials. These trials are a high priority for the university as they lay the groundwork for larger multi-center and later stage trials, and they provide a valuable experience for junior investigators in the development and conduct of clinical trials. So what is an IIT? It's when an investigator conceives the idea for research, significantly contributes or develops the protocol, or holds the IND or IDE. The OCRST monitoring team acts as a central piece to the successful conduct of IITs. The monitoring process of clinical trials encourages real-time adjustments to study operations in order to maintain accountability and oversight while ensuring the scientific integrity of the research data. Our monitoring team currently only monitors IITs. Next slide. If you're interested in obtaining OCRST monitoring services, the investigator must fill out and submit a protocol synopsis form and request OCRST monitoring, along with any other services needed, whether that's regulatory or project coordination. The PI will then need to present at the IIT review committee. And once the IIT committee approves the protocol to move forward, the monitoring team will begin working with the PI and study team. This is really a short overview. So if you're interested in more details regarding IITs, there is an IIT panel next Lunch and Learn on December 6th. And I highly recommend everybody check it out if they have time. Next slide. So some services that OCRST monitors provide are protocol reviews. We review database builds and provide feedback. We do site initiation visits, interim risk-based monitoring, study closeout visits, and clinical monitoring plan development. Our monitoring of our IITs is described in further detail in the clinical monitoring plans created specifically for each clinical trial. No 2 monitoring plans are the same. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. So how we're different from sponsor monitoring. Our monitoring team is involved with the protocol from the very beginning. We help out with protocol reviews, providing feedback before the study goes to the IRB. We work with project coordinators, regulatory PIs, and study teams to build a database to reflect endpoints and risk-based monitoring practices, as well as to develop our CMP. Also, monitors are a part of the university, so we can be quite a bit more flexible with the teams and PIs regarding schedules, monitoring visits, and deadlines. Next slide. So the biggest question we get asked the most is risk-based monitoring. So I'll define risk-based monitoring first and go into a little bit later. So the FDA states that sponsors of clinical trials are required to provide oversight, including ensuring proper monitoring of the trial. Such oversight helps to ensure adequate protection of the rights, safety, and welfare of participants in the clinical trial and the integrity of the data submitted to the FDA. Therefore, sponsors should implement a system to manage throughout all stages of the clinical trial, both risk to participants and data integrity. The FDA recommends that sponsors use a risk-based approach to develop their monitoring plans and to revise their monitoring plans if needed as the clinical trial proceeds. So in short, the aim of risk-based monitoring is to focus monitoring on those trial processes most likely to affect the patient's safety and data quality. This is done by using real-time analytics so that investigators can move more quickly and effectively mitigate risk or address errors before they compromise trial quality. Next slide. So how does OCRST do this? So we actually start at the very beginning of the study by focusing on the protocol and the database. During the protocol and database development, we'll work with the PI and study team to recognize not all data is the same. What does that mean by saying that? So some data is obviously more important than other data, such as in trial, like endpoints and research procedures versus things like hat size or just data of interest, right? So by analyzing and agreeing to which data is important and vital to the study, this allows us to prioritize which points need to be collected in the protocol and need to be collected in the database and therefore monitored. By analyzing and agreeing which data is important and vital to the study, this will allow us to prioritize which data points, I just said that, need to be monitored, sorry. The prioritization will result in decreased amounts of data entry and monitoring of unnecessary data, such as hat size, and thus save everyone time and money. So in the beginning of protocol reviews, we really push for and only collect important data that the team will actually analyze into the EDC system. We meet with various groups during the design of the study and the database build, including stats, and discuss which fields should or should not be included in the database. We then have a situation where our database only contains important data. Basically, what goes into the database is only what is truly needed. And in the end, what's in the database will be monitored just at different time points, depending on the overall risk assessment. So how do we complete our risk assessment? We do this in 2 steps. First, we complete a risk assessment at the OCRST team level. That includes regulatory and project coordinators, as well as monitors. Then the monitors complete their own risk assessment in order to develop the clinical monitoring plan that reflects the risk of the study, whether that's high, medium, low, and also what is prioritized for review and how often visits will happen. And just to note, the risk assessment of the study is continuous and changes throughout the life cycle of the study. What does that mean? It means if there's like multiple SAEs, if it's high enrolling, if there's multiple data errors, that can mean more monitoring and up the risk of the study. If all subjects are on follow-up, if it's slow enrolling, if the data is perfect, clean, no issues, that can mean less monitoring and a lower risk. So next slide. So what does this look like at our monitoring visits? We'll prioritize things like inclusion and exclusion, consent, critical study endpoints, AEs, SAEs, DOA trainings, regulatory, and we'll also review data quality to see like how many queries are issued. If there's lots of queries, we'll really look closer at the data. Things like standard of care procedures, ConMeds, that'll be reviewed just at a later date once the higher priority data is reviewed. We'll also look for data trends. We'll pull reports to see amount of queries, how long queries are open, and look at trends such as missing data, like, for example, is all the O2 missing? We'll pull reports for deviation, like are all the blood draws being done late? These trends will help us discuss possible protocol amendments as needed as the study continues on. Next slide. And then these are common findings we see during our routine monitoring visits. For the AEs, a lot of times it's incomplete AE documentation or documentation not matching the source. For data quality, a lot of times it's missing data or forms submitted incomplete and units of measurements being requested in the database not entered correctly, such things like pounds being entered instead of kilograms, things like that. And then for missing documentation, a lot of times it's incomplete DOA and trainings, no surprise there, right? And also sometimes reconsent documentation. Our biggest tip to avoid these mistakes is to really slow down and confirm and really think about what's being entered. Oftentimes when we're entering data, we'll go on like an autopilot mode. So we're not really paying attention to what the database is asking. So if you kind of pull back and slow down and look at what the database is asking to be entered, it helps out quite a bit. Also, really make sure that the source, whether that's paper or electronic, the database and Epic all match. We kind of like to call that a trifecta. all three need to match, and all three need to be consistent throughout the study matching. But in all in all, the CCTO works really hard, so our visits go really smooth and it makes our lives easy. And the study team will often work to resolve many of our findings during the visit, which we really appreciate because it makes our letters shorter and our life a whole heck of a lot easier. So to sum up, we really enjoy working with everyone at the Cancer Center, and we look forward to continuing to work with the study teams in the future. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Dipietro, and going to talk to you now about the Hematology Clinical Trials Unit, or the HCTU, as we call it for short. Next slide, please. A little bit about myself. I am currently the Data and Monitoring Supervisor at the HCTU. My daily focus is on quality, timely data deliverables, process improvement, and audit readiness. Briefly, my background: I got my bachelor's in health science and business administration at the University of Miami. And upon graduation, I started working for a clinical research organization, or a CRO, where I worked for over 10 years in various monitoring roles, which included clinical monitoring, clinical team lead, and clinical project management. And 4 years ago, I joined the HCTU as a clinical research monitor to launch the clinical monitoring piece of the HCTU, which we will get into shortly. Next slide, please. So the HCTU is within the Division of Hematology. Collectively, the division is supported by over $4 million in annual research funding, which is aimed to improve the lives and outcomes for blood cancer patients. Here's a snapshot of our trials from our website. So we have allotransplantation trials, leukemia, multiple myeloma, MPN, quality of life, lymphoma trials, MDS, non-cancerous blood disorder trials, as well as tissue bank studies. Next slide, please. The leadership of the HCTU, it's led by Dr. Dan Pollier, Derek Schatz as the program director, and Natalie Fenning as a clinical research manager. This here is a snapshot of our current trial breakdown. So we currently have about 15 investigators. We have 56 trials that are open with various IRBs. The status of those trials: 32 are open to accrual, 24 are currently closed, and we have 19 in our pipeline. As Stephanie went through the difference between IIT and industry studies, we have the majority of ours are industry studies, currently at 43, and you'll see we have 13 IITs. The IITs are the ones that the monitoring groups within the Cancer Center are tasked with monitoring. So you'll see here that the monitoring team for HCTU that I'm going to talk about today are responsible for monitoring 9 of our 13. The other 4 are from the past, when before we launched the HCTU monitoring program, and OCRST, Stephanie's group, historically monitored those and will continue to monitor those until they close. So any since then and future are monitored by this HCTU team. Next slide. So there's 2 of us. Isabel and I make up the monitoring team. Isabel joins us in a dual role as well. So she is also a regulatory coordinator for the industry trials at the HCTU, as well as a clinical research monitor on the IITs. So together we make up a 1.5 FTE and monitor 9 of those trials, as mentioned. So 8 of those trials, 8 of our 9 are on a reduced monitoring plan. Other tasks that we do as monitors: we build and manage the trial master file. We build the ECRF, as Stephanie also explained, OCRST does for their group. So we build the ECRFs for each of the studies, whether that be in REDCap or the newer system Advara. We perform all monitoring visit types throughout the life of the study. So we perform site initiation through closeout visit, and then also site selection for external sites. Like OCRST, we do participate in protocol development from the very beginning. So we work with the site team, the investigator, as well as the regulatory and clinical groups to give feedback on the protocol, add in anything that's needed for the ECRF, and just general trial setup questions. We also aid study teams in prepping for audits with a focus on audit readiness. So we're ready along the way and less scrambling prior to an audit. And we review SAEs that are submitted for not only completeness and accuracy, but also regulatory submission. And then we identify issues and any re-education needs that need to occur amongst the team. Next slide, please. Okay, so risk-based monitoring, which Stephanie detailed well, also has been very important and a buzzword for the past few years. Basically, it is worked into our clinical monitoring plans. As I mentioned, 8 of our 9 are on a reduced monitoring or a risk-based monitoring plan. So how that works is if there's a threshold of errors identified that's stated within our CMP or our clinical monitoring plan per study, we revise it to increase the percentage that we source verify and or we increase our monitoring intervals to catch issues quicker and more real time. With that said, we do always review 100% of the informed consent process and its documentation in order to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of the human subjects. So something that's written into our CMPs for most of our IITs that we monitor is that as monitors, we only review restricted or excluded con meds for source data verification. Although in many of the protocols that have been written historically, every con med is to be captured and over-the-counter vitamin, etc. I don't think ever since I've been on the team has an investigator asked for that information or tried to extrapolate it from the EDC. So that is a lower risk for us due to the nature of our studies. The studies here at the HCTU thus far really marketed products that are being introduced to a new population or a product that's being used in a new therapy combination. So their risk and safety profiles have previously been well established by the actual manufacturer prior to regulatory approval. So that's one of the ways that we have reduced the work for the monitoring team. And then I'll get into in a couple bullet points how we've tried to alleviate that work as well for the site team. But first, talking about ECRF risk-based builds, similar to what Stephanie explained, we do work to only capture important data and data that's going to be looked at by our investigators and others as a result of the study. So an example, a real life example there is that we do not ask for lab results and vitals to be entered by the study teams in our current protocols to, one, avoid transcription errors and potential queries. And also our investigators don't extrapolate that from the EDC also, should they want to look at historical labs throughout the study or vitals or any trends. It's very simple for them to pull that from Epic EMR and they do so. So that's another way that we have saved time to the site as well as to the monitoring group. And then lastly, as far as building protocols, we also focus on risk-based builds. So our latest protocol and moving forward, we have asked or recommended that only targeted con meds are written into the protocol so that teams aren't reviewing every 1, 8, or 15 days any medication or change in medication. These patients are often going inpatient to outpatient, so changing routes, etc. So we've asked that just important medications that the study team or the investigator is interested in looking at and pulling from the EDC database be captured on the logs. So in future, we're going to be seeing less work as far as transcribing ConMeds onto a ConMed log, and then also restricted entry into the EDC. And again, this focus is mainly on ConMeds written into the protocol as either restricted or excluded. And by restricted, I mean those that are, if they are taken, they might reduce the dose of the study drug, and thus they're important. Lastly, for protocols, we do participate in the interim reviews that the study teams do, or we may suggest one to remove non-crucial procedures and data capture along the way. So definitely an ongoing process throughout the study. Another really important piece of risk-based monitoring is to use electronic systems remotely and between visits to monitor the health of your clinical trial sites. How we fulfill this in the HCTU is we are constantly running metrics on each of our IITs. So we run these numbers on ECRF data, quantifying outstanding queries, query aging, missing CRF pages, the percent that the monitoring team has source verified, days from the subject visit until data entry, and then open queries divided by active subjects. It's a pretty good performance indicator. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as most common findings, I don't think we can really talk about most common findings without a reference to ALCOA-C and ICH-GCP. So here on the right is just a reminder and reference to that checklist, which in summary, if it isn't documented, it is considered to not have happened. So the important piece there is to know that when an inspector or an auditor comes in to any of our study sites, that they should be able to sit down with the files, and whether it be regulatory or clinical, viewing the subject's journey through the trial, that the study record really, with minimal questions, really tells the story of the study. So these auditors and inspectors shouldn't have too many questions, because the documentation should be very complete. So looking back on the left to most common findings, incomplete case histories and source documentation. Some examples here is just missing source documentation, trying to find where that data was first captured and how we got that data into the EDC and if it does belong. Also incomplete questionnaires. So these are often patient-reported outcomes. They can be paper or electronic. But they're often written into the protocol as objectives of the study. So it's very important, if we are, for instance, looking at paper questionnaires, that the site staff review those entries of the entire questionnaire when the subject is finished, and instead of just filing it away and into the record, that they're making sure that any missed responses were intentionally missed, the subject didn't want to answer them, or if they need to go back and review. So important to quality check those items when possible. Also unsigned and dated entries, something that's often found. Failure to follow the investigational plan, of course, is referring to protocol deviations. So very important things there to avoid, or commonly found, is that the site didn't take corrective or preventative action to put into place to avoid future deviations. So inspectors really want to see that we may have had 3 missed labs in a row, but what is the site doing to fix that? How soon did they identify it, and what have they put in place? Also, in that same context, if re-education is needed, it's very important to complete the actual re-education that may have been mentioned, and also to document it. As far as ICF documentation deficiencies, often the wrong versions are pulled, like a prior version, which of course is very important, because the newest version the patient should have signed going on to study may include risk updates. So them signing a previous version, they truly didn't have the information they needed to consent. So very important to be using the current version of the ICF. Missing signatures, again, something that can be avoided with a quality check upon completion, but making sure those signatures necessary are complete and dated, and any fields that are applicable are completed. And then a failure to document the entire process, not just the form. And then lastly, IP accountability and documentation. There's often a lack of documentation related to the product dispensing, the subject compliance, product return, and education and instruction. So an example there is if the patient didn't return their diary for the first cycle, they're moving on to cycle 2. They need to be re-educated about the importance of a diary, and that needs to be documented so that anyone, from a monitor to an inspector comes in, they know that that patient has been re-educated. Similar to drug return, if the expected number of, for instance, tablets are not returned, it's very important that the team does their due diligence and documentation of such, of finding out where those missing tablets are. Were they actually ingested? Are they in a pill counter at home? Did they fall into the sink, etc.? So closing up all that documentation and really taking accountability of returning the IPs is a key responsibility of the investigator that's often delegated to the team. So that's just an important one as well. I think that's all I have. Next slide. Yeah, thank you.
Great. My name is Carolyn Dilz. I'm the monitoring program manager for the clinical research support team, which we abbreviate to CHRC. And I'm going to talk about our process, which is a little bit different from the HCTU and OCRST. So a little bit about me. I graduated from the University of Georgia and studied biological science and psychology. I have over a decade of experience in healthcare roles, but I started at CU Anschutz back in April 2017 as a clinical research coordinator with the melanoma group. I received my certified clinical research coordinator certification in October 2019, and then actually moved over to the hematology clinical trials unit to get an understanding of blood cancers in addition to my solid tumor background. I performed monitoring activities for 10 different studies, including 4 phase 1 CAR-T trials on campus since I started as the monitor with CREST. And we have grown the team from just me in 2021 to now a team of 5. Next slide. CREST offers an a la carte fee-for-service support for research conducted by CU faculty on campus. We support investigator-initiated and industry-sponsored interventional, observational, and secondary research with human participants, though all the protocols we monitor are technically in that investigator or university-initiated bucket. We fill the bandwidth gaps and help operationalize research by providing the necessary personnel and resources. So the bulk of our services are helping with startup from first contact to open to accrual or the SIV, budget preparation and negotiation, study invoicing, regulatory preparation and submissions, study coordination, and clinical monitoring and ECRF development. Next slide. And this is just a little bit of history of CREST, because I know it's a pretty new group on campus compared to, say, OCRST or the HCTU. We're actually created by the Colorado Clinical and Translational Science Institute back in 2017 to fill that gap in support for investigators and clinical research teams that didn't have the capacity to support all of their research operations. The group started with 2 members in 2017, working on just a handful of clinical studies, and then transitioned to the Clinical Research Operations Support Office within the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research. This move allowed us to increase our presence on campus and support even more departments as an institutional clinical research resource. We did have a lot of turnover due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as I'm sure many other groups here were also affected. But we now have a really robust team of, this is even out of date, it's 20 research professionals as of today. That includes 12 coordinators, 3 monitors, and an EDC build specialist, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. This is just a graph of some of the hours per service type, just so to give more of an overview of where our department is focusing a lot of our efforts. And you can definitely see where we've had some 2022, I was working primarily by myself until we hired some additional help. And so it's been really exciting to grow the program. We have, as a department, supported over 330 protocols conducted by 155 PIs in 62 research groups within 37 departments across 4 offices and schools. So a wide breadth of experience. Next slide. So I'm going to keep talking about the clinical monitoring services specifically. And as part of our service, we focus on developing clinical monitoring plans, providing site education and training, both as part of the SIV and even in that prior to accrual startup space as well. We perform source data verification during interim on-site or remote monitoring visits. We have done both based on different projects that we've monitored. We conduct study closeout visits, and we also develop electronic case report forms and manage databases in the Advara electronic data capture system, which is Part 11 compliant. Next slide. We are a fee-for-service model, and our rates are impacted by inflation every year and typically go about 6%. But right now, the clinical monitoring fee is $93 per hour. And we are exploring a shift in our billing model to allow more service for in a more cost-effective FTE model when that is more affordable for our investigators. So we're really excited to be able to offer that going forward. Next slide, please. We have an exceptional monitoring team here at CHRC with over 25 years of clinical research experience combined between the 5 of us. Katie Anderson, Molly Pomeroy, and Cindy Harris are our clinical monitors, and they all have at least 2 years of oncology experience prior to joining CHRC. And then Eleanor Rawlinson is our monitoring facilitator, and she's really driving the EDC development and CRF builds for our investigator, or our sponsor investigator trials that we monitor. And she's also helping us with a lot of projects that we need help with as we expand our program. Next slide. And we work with a lot of different groups on campus, and we provide monitoring services for studies that are deemed medium to high risk. Currently, the bulk of our work, as you can see from this pie chart, is for 4 different chimeric antigen receptor T-cell studies that are a partnership with the Gates Institute. For these studies, the CAR T-cell is a cellular therapy, and it's actually the manufacturing for those CAR T-cells actually performed at the Gates biomanufacturing facility on campus. So it's really cool to have a homegrown CAR T program being conducted at CU Anschutz, and it's really great to be involved as monitors for those projects. And as you can imagine, it's a lot of work. These are all phase 1 studies. They're impacting patients with B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia and B-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma primarily, though those may be expanding a little bit in the future to different subtypes. And then the studies that we monitor actually span 2 different CAR T products, the UCD19 CAR T, and then what's called a CD19 by 22 CAR T. What's really cool about the CD19 by 22 CAR T is that it is first in human. So that has been a really exciting project. And we are monitoring protocols that are conducted at on the adult side at UC Health at CU Anschutz, and also at Children's Hospital, Colorado. We're also involved with the Cancer Center and helping with Dr. Keith's study on a PD-1 lung cancer prevention study. We're working with the Linda Cernick Institute for Down Syndrome on an investigation of therapies for Down syndrome progression disorder. We're excited to work with Dr. Novick and his team in the Department of Psychiatry on the effect of psilocybin on anhedonia in treatment-resistant depression. And we've worked on a device study with the Department of Family Medicine the new bionic pancreas device for type 1 diabetes. And historically, we've also worked on the effect of CBD on motor symptoms in Parkinson's disease with the Department of Neurology. So lots of different groups for sure. Next slide, please. So something that is new is that we have a new pipeline for how we engage monitoring services on campus. The Central Investigational New Drug and Device Program at CU Anschutz consists of 2 branches. So there's the IND/IDE office within the Vice Chancellor of Research, and we like to abbreviate that IIO because it's a mouthful. And then there's also the Cancer Center within the School of Medicine. So as of July 1st of this year, FDA submissions must go through one of these program branches and are triaged based on the project type and therapeutic area. Next slide. And so what this means is that the PI, sponsor investigator, will contact the IIO via a triage intake form on their website, ideally during their study budget development. The IIO medical director will complete a risk assessment for that project based on that information collected in the triage form. If the study is determined to be high risk based on that medical director risk assessment, external clinical monitoring and Part 11 compliant EDC platform must be used, and CREST services are presented as an option to the PI for clinical monitoring. So if they decide that's the way they want to go, because it's a little bit more affordable than hiring, or a lot more affordable than hiring an external monitoring service, then the IIO will submit a help request form on our website and work through a warm handoff with us about clinical monitoring. So next slide. And then our CREST help request form is applicable for any of the services that CREST provides. So there's a lot of fields. We never expect that every single field will be completed, but some of the key ones for clinical monitoring are knowing who the PI is, the department, contact information, indicating that clinical monitoring is the service that is requested. Next slide. And then knowing whether the study's already started or when it's expected to start, when it's expected to end, what the enrollment expectations are, and the approximate budget is really helpful for that budgeting piece because we are a fee-for-service model. We also want to know how to get in touch with the person submitting the form, and any additional documentation that's already available is really great. We do ask for an IRB approved protocol before we start working on actual monitoring tasks to make sure that we are working off of the most current information and building a plan that makes sense for the protocol that's going to be used to enroll patients. But we know that sometimes that's not possible yet. So just having a draft is helpful for those initial budget conversations. Next slide. And then the CREST help request form is sent to all of the CREST leadership. And so if monitoring services are requested, I will review that record. I reach out to schedule a meeting. If we agree that we're going to move forward with CREST as a clinical monitoring service, we create a service agreement describing our responsibilities and billing plan. A primary clinical monitor is assigned to that study, and they begin work on startup activities. So like developing the clinical monitoring plan, figuring out sort of the site processes for capturing data in their EDC, or how they're going to keep track of source documentation on the study. And if a PI needs to change the scope or terminate work, we can update our service agreement at any time. Next slide. So like Stephanie and Lucy mentioned as well, we also focus on a risk-based approach when developing our clinical monitoring plans. No monitoring plan is the same, and studies have different risks and have different risk levels inherently, as well as as the study evolves. So we also use a flexible approach to these monitoring plans and update them throughout the life of a trial that we are monitoring. But we do focus on source data verification of critical data elements and processes central to human subject protection and data integrity. And we tailor our clinical monitoring plans to mitigate risk based on the complexity of the study design, complexity and volume of study endpoints, clinical complexity of the study population, electronic data capture requirements, relative safety of investigational product, phase of the study and the quantity of data collected. Next slide. And then we do determine the level of monitoring required based on a risk assessment. So now that we have the IND/IDE risk assessment process part of the pipeline, that is helpful, but we also do an internal risk assessment on that better informs the level of monitoring required for each study. So for a higher risk study, we will perform more intensive monitoring visits, at least initially. So we're looking at scheduling our first monitoring visit within 4 weeks of the first patient enrollment date, and then scheduling subsequent interim monitoring visits more frequently. So every 4 to 6 weeks is our maximum frequency at this time. We also focus on site processes, which I think Stephanie and Lucy both described really well as well. So really looking at like the informed consent process, maintenance and filing of source documentation, because as Lucy mentioned, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So a lot of our job is figuring out where those gaps are and is there a process we can improve to make sure that those issues are addressed, not just for one patient at one time, but across patients on a given study. We also look at the eligibility review and documentation process, SAE and AE capture and assessment, protocol specific and GCP training, data entry in the EDC, investigational product receipt, storage, dispensation, and administration, randomization, and maintenance of a blind if that's applicable to the study. Next slide, please. And then we talk about critical data. I think you're going to see a lot of common themes here, but we are focused on essential document maintenance in the investigator site file for the trial. So continuously reviewing the DOA, training records, and staff credentials throughout the life cycle of the trial, performing informed consent review for all patients, checking adherence to eligibility criteria for all patients, reviewing investigational product accountability and administration, which can include pharmacy visits during our on-site monitoring visits when that is a component. We also check for adherence to protocol required safety assessments and focusing on those most impactful assessments first, and then going to things that may not be quite as impactful to patient safety. Adherence to randomization and blinding procedures as applicable, source data verification of critical study endpoints. So making sure that we prioritize the review of those case report forms in the database and supporting source documents that affect the primary study endpoints as part of that data integrity piece. And then safety data documentation and reporting. So taking a really close look at serious adverse events, unanticipated problems, dose-limiting toxicities, adverse events, making sure that those reporting requirements are met as required by the protocol and institutional policies. Next slide. We also have some common themes and the common findings that we encounter. And in terms of investigator site file, often it's just the medical licenses and trainings have been completed, but they just haven't been filed before our visit. So just following up on those, ensuring that all protocol amendment trainings are completed by all delegated staff. We've also seen the wrong version of ICFs used if there's a new ICF that's been released recently. Missed reconsents, optional selections incomplete on a consent, or staff dating where a staff member dating where a participant should have dated the consent. We also see a lot of source documentation, ALCOAC related findings, and particularly missing source documentation. So as Lucy mentioned, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So a lot of times we're just filling in the gaps on telling the whole story of what happened within that clinical research subject's time on trial and making sure that all that documentation is filed in their record and that it's consistent with all the data that's entered into the database. And then in terms of adverse event tracking and recording, just making sure that AE logs are complete at the time of monitoring visits, and that includes investigator assessments of the grade and attribution is really important. And then making sure that the assessments of clinical significance are completed in a timely manner and captured on the appropriate AE log and in the database. Next slide, please. One of the most common types of errors that we see is just having to make a correction in source. And this is just a slide of breaking down how we recommend fixing something. So when it's a documentation error. So first step is to identify the incorrect entry, strike through the original entry with one single line, enter the correct data, include an explanation of the change as applicable. I think that's a piece that's missed the most often, but helps us tell the whole story of what happened with that transition from the previous entry to the correction. And then have the person making that correction to sign or initial and date the date of the correction in real time. So as a reminder, the use of whiteout or other legible marks to obscure the original entry are not permitted. You know, it's a lot. There's so many pieces of documentation for a clinical trial. We know that errors are going to happen, and that's why monitoring is so important, just to capture those errors as a second review and show opportunities for improvement. We also look at the trends and deviations and look to figure out if there's a process that can be improved to reduce those deviations, or perhaps a protocol amendment, and being able to make those recommendations to either the sponsor investigator or the group that is sponsoring the trial to alleviate some of those deviations in the future. And then next slide. So we also, I've linked our website here on this slide, but we have a general monitoring inbox, which is crossclinicalmonitoring@cuanschutz.edu. And you can also contact me directly. My email is my name @cuanschutz.edu. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Christy Williamson. I'm with the Clinical Research Administration Office, or CRAO. Next slide, please. Thanks for having me today. I graduated with a bachelor's in psychology from Colorado State, and I've worked in clinical research for over 15 years. I started off at National Jewish, and I did neuropsych research there, and then eventually moved over to the university where I worked the Department of Neurology on clinical trials for new epilepsy investigational drugs. And then after that, I joined Central Administration and have been there for about 10 years. I'm now, I started off doing quality assurance reviews and education with that team, but then have kind of gained more responsibilities over the years. I'm assistant director currently, but I still continue to oversee and assist with QA reviews. It's one of my very favorite things to do. Next slide, please. So the CRAO QA team consists of two individuals that have both been here for 5+ years on this team, Corey Side Sites and Karina Nguyen. And we don't do a whole lot of monitoring. So I'm very pleased to have been invited to speak today and share with you what we do. We do mostly QA reviews, so quality assurance reviews. And these are basically audits, but with an educational spin on them. So we provide a lot of support, a lot of tools, a lot of guidance to all of the findings that we see with regulatory documents and clinical and subject documents. So the types of reviews that we do for cause, and these are those that are requested by the IRB or senior research leadership, where there are potentials for serious or continuing noncompliance. We are under the Office of Regulatory Compliance, so we could do these for anybody on campus. But then we also do conduct routine QA reviews. We do about 4 of these a month. Our QA reviewers have a lot of other responsibilities, and so that kind of keeps everything interesting, but we do about 4 of these, 4+ a month. And how we prioritize these are by level of risk. So again, another theme that we're talking about here today. So the ones we look at are the top of the list that we look at regularly are those investigator-held IND and IDE studies. They're investigator initiated. These are studies that don't have any monitoring support. We prioritize, again, non-oncology studies. There's a DSMC within the Cancer Center that handles those oncology studies, but we do overlap every so often. There's studies that come through that look like it could be oncology, but maybe not. And so we communicate pretty regularly with them to see who has oversight. We can also do routine QA reviews as requested. sometimes PIs reach out and say, oh my gosh, the FDA is coming or our sponsor's coming for an audit. Can you please come and help us prepare for that? Totally happy to do that. Other times PIs reach out to say, gosh, I've had a change in hands of my coordinators and I want to just get a baseline of where my study records are. So again, we go and conduct QA review there. The monitoring that we do is really only upon special request. So we have a lot of great resources here on campus anyway, and we work with investigators who don't have any funding or have had limited funding, don't really have the funds to put towards monitoring, but we work with them to explore every possible option with what we have already. So whether it be CRUST or OCRST or, maybe outside a CRO to provide that monitoring option. And when it comes to the point where there is just nothing else available, nothing that they could feasibly do to have that monitoring function covered, then we will step in and help out. As you can see, we currently only have 5 studies that we monitor, so very, very low number there. And we do review all of the things that Stephanie and Lucy and Carolyn have already talked about during those monitoring visits. Everything that we do is provided at no cost. Next slide, please. So monitoring functions that we provide, we will meet with the PI and their study team ahead of time. And that really just establishes expectations for what those monitoring visits are going to look like, how often they're going to happen, who the contact personnel will be throughout the trial. And then we'll discuss the monitoring plan. So the monitoring plan is, we follow it put together by the PI. If they need some insight and help with that, we can provide that as well. And then the monitoring visits themselves, they occur at a frequency that's detailed in the monitoring plan. They're all different. Again, I think that's something that we've heard about along the way. Each plan is different per study, and as well as how many subjects are verified at each study visit. Some want us to come in after that initial subject's enrolled and take a look and see, what things are getting missed, how to tweak and correct that data recording before they start enrolling other patients. Others want us to come after every 10 subjects are enrolled. And then yet again, it could be different where it's, the plan says, at each, quarterly monitoring visit, just enroll or just review every subject that's been enrolled since that last monitoring visit. So they're all just a little bit different. And then at the end, a report of findings and then suggestions for improvement is provided to the PI and the study team. Next slide. And some of the common findings that we see are not different from what the others have seen, which is comforting to me, I suppose. So I've included some examples of how we suggest that some of these issues be corrected as well. So incomplete study records, we see this a lot. One of the big examples that we often see are those blank fields on that source documentation, right? We got to tell the whole story. So we always recommend, if it's an individual finding, so just one-off thing, include a late entry to explain why it's blank, initial that, sign it, date it. If it's multiples, create a note to file to reconcile those deviations, sign it and date it, really figure out what's going on and how is the study team going to fix it and have that be documented in that note to file. We see a lot of instances where city trainings expired or not in file. And the recommendation here is to either just file that missing training certificate. Most of the time, I think that's what the issue is. But if not, you got to complete that training, then file certificates. We also see a lot of incomplete regulatory records. So for example, missing IRB approval letters. The regulatory record needs to be complete with all the approval letters for the whole life of the study. And so we got to fill in those gaps, tell the complete story for those regulatory records as well. And so the recommendation there is to, again, file that missing document or indicate if there's an electronic location for it. And then something that we've seen increase over the past couple of years with schedule shifting to being hybrid and not always in the office is with electronic record management. So This one keeps coming up more and more, is copies of records that are stored electronically have not been certified. Their recommendation here is, in order to certify these copies, have a statement that they are true and complete copies. Add that to each form, or if you're going to batch it, have it in the very first page of the batch, and include the date the copy was made and signature of the team member who made the copy. So it's been a pleasure to be here on the panel, and that's all I have for you. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, everybody, all four of you, for sharing all that information. We really enjoyed it. We do not have time for a Q&A now, but if any of you do have questions for any of our panelists today or want more information, please let us know and we'd be happy to connect you with them. We will be sending out an email with a couple of certifications and things for you, so you're more than welcome to respond to that email with your questions, and we'll get those fielded to the correct people if you do have those. But thanks again, everyone, for attending today, and thank you to our panelists for being here and for all the work that you do in the monitoring field.
You.